there's a lot of myths and confusion around the vocabulary, not least because it's quite difficult to define the distinctions between AI, machine learning, and data processing. But that said, and whichever kind of specific definition you move away from, we can see different points, I think, in the process of and value chain of news production, and different news organizations are showing strength at different points in that curve. So those that really look at news gathering and how to use AI at that point of story sourcing. For example, cases such as Herbs Media and Radar is the project in the UK, which is doing a great job at taking great data sets and then dividing those out into stories for other news organizations. That's very much at the news gathering and story sourcing stage. But then you've also got AI developments in content production to do with natural language processing or automated generation of news texts and bots, as I've learned to familiarize ourselves with those. And then distribution, of course, automation of news personalization, and then moving forward towards marketing and sales and seeing how machine learning can fit there. So at different points, I think, in the value chain of the news production, we can see different examples of AI emerging.
Fantastic. And actually, recently I even heard that LinkedIn is investing some resources into AI in hiring. So maybe that's something that would also come over to the media industry. So really, the breadth of applications is kind of mind-boggling. To switch over to Value My News. So this is a really exciting project. We had a discussion a little bit earlier about it. Basically, you're looking at the news industry as a whole, right? In many ways, right? And how AI can be applied there. Can you sort of characterize the project and what the driving idea is behind it?
Yeah, of course. So the project Value My News is a collaboration between ourselves, the University of Cardiff, the Independent Community News Network, which is almost a members network from across the UK of very small publishers, so independent, community-driven, hyperlocal type publishers who on their own are doing an amazing job in their terrain. But what we really kind of advocate for is how do we build infrastructures that can preserve independence but achieve some sort of scale and recognition to access and make changes in the kind of revenue model, the business model of smaller news organizations. So Value My News is a platform, a project that brings in content from these independent publishers into one place on the platform called Ping. And that allows us then, once that content is brought in through an open API, to actually start thinking about how we can use data processing to make sense of that data and add value. And the whole point is, can we actually create new revenue streams for independent media by acting like a newswire? So what we want to do is having all that content now coming in, even though it's still available on the websites of those individual publishers, is once we've got it together, what can we do with that to provide services that are of value to mainstream news organizations, bigger news organizations, perhaps brands that want to activate grassroots campaigns. It opens up a whole terrain of opportunities. And I think what's really interesting about our project is over the last year or so, I've realized that it speaks to a couple of different people who are trying to do similar things. There's one called Media Bridge that's being led in partnership with various organizations, including International Media Support. There's also Mitra Kilata in New York, who formerly from the CNN, who's trying to do the same sort of thing for Black and ethnic minority communities. So how do we use AI to create newswire type services that can amplify the voices of independence.
Mm-hmm. So classical newswire, just for those who might not know, you have the central agency and then a bunch of people who are writing for it and reporting from all different places, right? It's typically a really large organization. What you're saying with Value My News is like, forget about this sort of centralized, highly, in a way bureaucratic actually institution, which is a newswire. Let's sort of decentralize this and use, this platform, Ping, to coordinate people and coordinate stories and bring them from a local level up to a national level.
Absolutely. It's literally a mechanism to create the infrastructure that allows partnerships and allows you to start to see where their connections can be made. So are there 3 stories that on their own had value for a small community, but put them together, perhaps actually that speaks to a different news agenda for a different news organization that would previously not have been seen had those stories not been put together.
Mm-hmm. So it's scanning the stories as well and trying to identify sort of various tags, put them together in different ways that might not seem obvious, and then sort of for the sort of potential central buyer, the national news organization, they kind of pick up stories in different locations, which I assume might be really interesting as well when you have sort of stories that appear a little bit like COVID appeared, a year ago, that if you're seeing local stories of people getting sick, well, then actually, you could aggregate a trend. I'm now taking an absolutely hypothetical issue, but I imagine that's something to some extent that could really show up.
Absolutely. So the things that we can see, thanks to potentially through machine learning,
Mm-hmm.
the things that we would not have seen in that data set before from those individual stories. So in the news gathering sense, you've got the chance to see news black holes almost,
Mm-hmm.
because we can see which stories are being covered, but perhaps which aren't. And that we wouldn't have seen that dynamic had we not actually put all the stories in together. We'll be able to predict patterns. We'll be able to see perhaps 3 or 4 independents have flagged a particular issue. So it'll be a way from grassroots up to actually see those stories emerging, which I think will be really important. So that's kind of news gathering aspects of this, but then there's also, as I said, the content production. So as news producers are putting stories into the system, natural language processing can help almost identify the right tags. It can help sort taxonomies and therefore kind of learn how best to categorize all the data. And then moving forward toward marketing and sales, which is important for us because the main point of our platform is to create new revenue streams for independents. It's about the people who are logging on to see that content. If they've seen stories that are particularly relevant to them in the past, and maybe they've purchased those, it's about being able to suggest other stories that they might want to buy. So there's a marketing and sales dimension to this as well, which would not have been possible if we weren't grasping AI.
So this is really interesting. So, I think by modern rules, you're only allowed to characterize a business model in 2 types. It's a sort of the Uber for local news or the Netflix for local news. I think all other characterizations are essentially banned. What would be the business model here?
I think Uber. Yeah, and and we're not alone in that. It's all about trying to find scale through small publishers, and where we can connect those together and use AI to sense make to add further value. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. So right now, this is what you're actually investigating. Sorry if I'm sharing something a little bit, confidential. Allow me to push the limit a little bit. But essentially, one of the things that you want to test now, as I understand, is the introduction of a sort of a valuing system, right? Like tokens or ways to sort of to get the potential buyers in the system, the big news publishers, to assign value to the local stories that would later be sort of like a piece of information for the local journalist that, hey, this is something that is interesting nationally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You make a really great point. I think what we're trying to do here is learn what is of value.
Hmm.
And why, and to quite a granular level. And if we allowed kind of mainstream news publishers to just buy, blanket seat at the table or subscriptions to the whole thing, we would never really learn what stories were of value, when, where, and why. So we're going to quite, a detailed level here in our beta phase to assign taxonomies and tags very specifically to different content so that we can start to learn which stories were of interest. And obviously a lot of this is going to have to be done reasonably painstakingly through qualitative feedback against stories to start with. And it's something that I'm sure Charlie will speak to in a little bit, but the implementing this kind of technology is not easy, and it takes a lot of time to learn before the machine can do it for you.
Out of interest, what was the reaction of the big publishers? How are they sort of looking at this?
Really, really desperate to get more stories that are made from communities, and really keen to have other tools as their input flow. Very reliant still on email newsletters, though. They said that even if we were to use our technology to output hints and tips about what's trending through the system, they still want to receive that as an email alert of some description. They don't want to log on to the platform. So workflow questions and how to actually make sense of that is important for us to bear that in mind.
Okay, fantastic. One final question, and then I think we can we'll move on to Ben and Shane from Loyal AI. But what is sort of the next step here? So right now you're testing this. For everyone who's sort of eager to hear more, what is the timeline that you're looking at?
Honestly, and I'm sure we wouldn't be alone in this, I'll speak absolutely candidly and frankly, it's the business model for the platform. So we need to go through beta phase now to make sure that we can work out how to apportion value, how to redistribute any money into the system. How do you actually divide that between the hyperlocals and independent publishers? What kind of decimates that business model in terms of if you get more people providing content and you've only got the same number of people who are buying it, then you've obviously created less value for each person. So there's loads of really tricky questions to be answered about this kind of infrastructure level use of this kind of platform, but it's all very exciting.
It certainly sounds really exciting. I'm really excited to hear further updates of how it's going.